My name is Mike Schultz. I originate from Kansas, farm ranch, done some businesses, been involved in agriculture quite a bit, founded the Kansas Cattlemen's Association in '98 and then started working for RCAF USA, working with those guys, and we got that group off the ground, which is the national representation for cattle producers all across the country to compete basically against the NCBA types. So we've done that. I actually moved up at one point to vice president, and I became the chair for the Country of Origin Labeling Committee. And then I became on this board here about 2 years ago. I got elected, and so it's been an interesting deal because this is kind of what they consider the think tank for people in the industry. So I've been involved around a lot of people here with dairy, poultry, the chicken issues, and we, myself, we'd raised hogs at one point, and a lot of us are in the beef industry. So that's kind of what I do. I'm a cow-calf operator. So my point is today that we want to talk about mandatory COOL and the support for that by the congressional man, if they would come on board with us and help us get mandatory COOL reinstated. There's been a fallacy out there that because of the WTO ruling, the World Trade Organization ruled against mandatory COOL back in 2014, and they depleted it later in 15, but 2014 the WTO ruled that there was a violation of several issues, and therefore they removed the MCOOL ruling for the country here in the United States. So now we have imported product coming in here that's mislabeled as U.S. product when it's actually been imported. So that's a fraudulent claim led by some of those in the packing industry to capture a bigger share of the retail beef dollar with imported product. And so the MCOOL deal, there were three things that were addressed during the WTO ruling, and it said basically one of them was that the record-keeping burden for livestock was not correct. And so we want to address those three things to make the WTO issue null and void, and we can reinstate mandatory COOL for the producers like myself. So by doing that, reduce the record-keeping burden of imported livestock says basically that they can't lose their identity. So the Canadian and Mexican live cattle all either have a CAN brand on them or an M brand on the jaw. So that would be retained all the way through to slaughter to make sure that they know that those cattle, and that would carry that identity all the way through the processing. Those were imported cattle. Okay, so the second thing they argued, and they said, well, you guys, but the importing product here is to improve the accuracy of labels. That was number two. So we feel that we've addressed that now, and that basically says that if a calf was fed in Canada and then brought down to the United States and processed and slaughtered here, it would carry the label as born and raised in Canada and then slaughtered in the U.S. So we agree with that. That's a good idea. We'll do that. So the number three thing they raised question about was the beef muscle cuts covered by the COOL requirements. Said there was an exemption for ground beef and muscle cuts into retail stores that sold less than $230,000 worth of product. So we'll remove that. So we actually feel like it's a good deal to say you as the last consumer should know when you go to a restaurant, any size restaurant, where your beef comes from. Beef or pork products are the two that are exempted, the only two products, and a little bit of dairy. So we have some issues with that, but we think we've resolved that. So if we take care of those three things, the senator representatives could reintroduce MCOOL and we can get it passed. And it's not a non-compliance deal with the WTO. Now the WTO said that if you don't do this, we're going to charge you $1 billion trade tariff. Did you ever see that? You've been around 6 years, but during your time when you came on, that was being discussed in 2014. That, if you guys don't remove this thing, we're going to bill you $1 billion trade tariff. That sounds like a lot of money. But I'm going to tell you, December 22nd of 2014, I sold my calves for $1,865 a head. Highest ever reported in my lifetime, and most of these guys in here captured a lot of money that year because mandatory COOL was fully implemented and we captured the market that year, and the imports were being addressed. Imports had to be marked and people weren't buying it. So that was a good deal for the U.S. cattle industry. So our cattle price took off. You know what happened with the foreign cattle markets at the same time, the Canadian and the Mexican cattle market? They followed ours. So they went up as well. Canada almost mirrors our price. And so they benefited too. A lot of the producers didn't know Canada was wanting to follow suit because they were enjoying good prices. You know what happened after they repealed COOL in those foreign countries? Their market went down like ours did. So as ours went down, that was a bad deal. But it cost me, over the last 6 years, $1,000 a head for every calf I've produced. So what I tell people, if you think I like losing $600,000, you're a damn fool. Okay? So here's what happened. We lost $1,000. So as a report, I just looked, in December of 2014, the average retail beef price to the consumer, you, was $5.65 a pound. Okay? Yesterday, the average retail beef price you pay today is $6.94 a pound. Just for the record, the fat cattle during December of 2014 were bringing about $1.65. Today they're $1.19. The other thing I'll tell you about, in May or June of last year, in 2020, the retail beef price that you were getting gouged by the packer and possibly sold foreign beef under the guise of a USA label was $7.93 a pound. So the packers captured a lot of money. The big four meat packers that do 74% of all the custom slaughter in the United States captured all that money. My deal is this. Do you know how many cattle were slaughtered in the U.S. last year?
No, sir.
Roughly about 34 million. If you take 34 million times $1,000, what do you get? It's $34 billion a year in lost revenue we've had in the United States as cattle producers that we could have distributed. And we had $1 billion trade threat from the WTO, and we caved in. Now, I guess it's like if you want to give me $1 and then I give you $34, you'd like that, wouldn't you? You give me $1 and I'll give you 34 back. That's a pretty good trade deal.
Yep.
I ain't gonna play that very long, but that's what they're doing to us. So we need mandatory country of origin labeling reinstated. We have lost on average about 17,000 cattle producers every year for about 17 years.